Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube. We're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And here is Stephen Vantassel with today's topic.
Thanks, Frank. Stephen Vantassel here, wildlife control consultant. Another episode of Living the Wildlife. Hey, wanted to talk today about inspections, about making the most of your inspection. Let's face it, as I said so many times before, wildlife control is time intensive. It takes a lot of time to do the work. And time is your most valuable commodity, and you can't make more of it. So when you get to the client, you've got to try to get as much value out of the client as possible. And you, in fairness, need to be giving that client as much value to them, to him or her, as possible, so that you're a mutually beneficial relationship. You're earning more money. Your client is getting more protection, a greater level of service. Think of an inspection like when you go to the doctor for your annual physical. It's a little checkup. So the problem is your client's called you about a particular problem, but you shouldn't get tunnel vision and just worry about that particular problem. So let's just say, for example, your client says they have bats or they think they have bats. When you're doing your inspection for those bats, you need to be obviously looking for whether they confirming or denying whether they have bats, but take the time to see what else they may have. And this is where you want to focus on, are there any other active issues that they're struggling with? And this is where people who have both insect experience, pest control, and wildlife control have an advantage because they can look for a greater variety of issues. So you're looking for active problems in addition to the active problem that you've been called for to begin with. The second, but you should also be looking for other issues, other things that could be potential problems. Are you able to do some exclusion and preventative work for that client? Sometimes we become a little tunnel vision, not just that we're focusing on the particular issue that the client's called us for, but we fail to tell the client how they can go about preventing pest problems in the future. And that's an obligation. So I've recently gotten my ACE. I am not a bug expert by any stretch of the imagination. It was really out of my wheelhouse, but I wanted to take the time to learn that. And one of the things that we have in our ethics as ACE is we are responsible to try to tell the truth to our clients and provide integrated pest management. Well, the same thing occurs when we're dealing with wildlife as well. You should not just be looking to help them resolve a particular problem. You should also be helping your client prevent other problems. Even if you can't make money on it or you're not making money on it, your job is to help that client live a better pest-free life, to protect their property, to protect their well-being, to protect their state of mind. That is your obligation. If we don't do that, we have, in a sense, failed to give our client the full benefit of our expertise. Now, some people may think, hey, that sounds like you're doing some heavy selling there, Stephen. Not necessarily. It could become heavy-handed salesmanship where you're trying to sell people things they don't necessarily need. And that's certainly true. And people could fall into that. And I'm not advocating that. But what I'm saying is that when you're doing that inspection and you're identifying whether they have the pest problem that they called you for, you're looking for other active pest problems, whether they do anything about it or not, it's good to help them identify problems. The third thing you should be doing is helping them identify potential issues that they could have problems. Is that attic vent screened properly? Are their chimneys properly screened? Are their exhaust vents properly screened? And just caution, be careful when you're dealing with dryer vents. Make sure you follow local regulations and state law. But even if your state doesn't have any regulations on that, you need to be sure you're using a device that doesn't interfere with collecting lint, because if you restrict that airflow too much and it's starting to collect lint, you're going to back things up and potentially cause a destructive fire or burn out the temperature sensor of that dryer. So make sure you learn how that could be done. There's some magnetic products out there. There's also some gravity products out there. Make sure you get your ducks in a row on that. That's a separate thing. So going through that list again, you should be identifying the pest problem that they called you for, whether it exists or not, looking for other active pest issues, whether it be vertebrate or insect. Third, you should be looking for potential weaknesses on that property. Are there things that they could be doing to prevent a pest problem in the future, whether it be chimney caps, attic screening, vent screening, securing garage doors, putting weather stripping along doors or proper door jams. And well, you know where I'm going with this. Are there things that should they be also, for those of you in the insect world, are the downspouts taking water away from the structure? Do they have weed-free zones? Are they trimming back tree branches away from the structure? That not only reduces the ease of animals getting on the structure, but also carpenter ants getting on the structure and other insects getting on the structure. Do they need to have certain lights changed to either being a motion sensor light to reduce pest activity or changing it to a yellow light bulb, different wavelengths to be less attractive to insects? Provide the information for your client so your client can make an informed decision. You want to do this in a way you say, well, I'm going to overwhelm my client. I understand that. So I take some of this information from a friend of mine, Charles Holt. He's presently the president of the National Wildlife Control Operators Association, which I'm a board member of, just Truth in Advertising. He came up with something that I wish I knew when I was still doing wildlife control for a living, from day to day. And that was his philosophy is, I'm just throwing it out there for those of you to think about. Whether you adopt it or not, it's your call, but it's something to interact with and think about. And I want you to process it. His philosophy is when he goes to a house, he writes up everything he sees that could be potentially resolved by his company. Now, in fairness, he doesn't do pest control. He doesn't do bugs. He just does vertebrates. So he's focusing on it strictly from a vertebrate control side of things. But his philosophy is, if the client listens to my suggestions, the client will never see me again. Now, that's an amazing statement. So what he does is when he comes, he may be doing a squirrel job and he's removing squirrels for the client. But he will take the time and say, hey, ma'am, your chimneys aren't capped. He will measure the chimney flues. He will tell them exactly what they need. He will put a price tag on that. Whether they take it or not is the client's decision, but the client has been empowered. The client knows the measurements. He tells them what they should be purchasing if they want to do it themselves, the type of equipment that they need to get. He is as soft sell as it gets. So if you think you have to do this as a hard sell, fear-mongering, scaring the daylights out of your client, that is simply not true. Because he has had a very successful business, and he doesn't do that. And I take him at his word for this. But I'm intrigued because there's something powerful about that. You're empowering your client, and he tries to break it down into things that should be done, could be done, may be done. It's not, I don't take my 3 levels here. He may have different phrasing for it, but the point is he has things that he says are kind of urgent and important. He prioritizes it. Things that are really recommended, things that are suggested, and things that are optional. And that empowers your client, because your client may at least say, well, it's better for me to have the chimney cap done now rather than get raccoons down into it or get a bird trapped inside of it, and spend the money now than to spend a bunch of money later. Plus, he can talk about the benefits of chimney capping. That's just one illustration. But he takes all the measurements. So even if the client doesn't do it themselves, and the fact is most clients won't do it themselves, if the client changes their mind, he doesn't have to come back and remeasure everything. He has the measurements already. He knows what chimney cap he has to bring. He knows what the measurements for the vents are. He knows exactly what he's going to do, so he doesn't have to make yet a third trip. He can come prepared to solve that particular problem. Now, to what extent that works in your company, in your company model, that's your call. My suggestion is, even if you don't want to empower your client with all of that information, you can still say, ma'am, I recommend a chimney cap here. Here would be the price. And you could, if you don't even give the client the information on how to purchase their own, and they, let's say, turn you down at this go around, you could have a card, an email, a phone call 3 months later and say, hey, we're just looking to see if you're interested in having this work done, and you may have a second bite at that apple. Or maybe your client decides they've been mulling it over, and maybe they heard about someone else with a chimney problem or someone else with a mouse problem, and they're looking to solve that problem, and you made a recommendation several months ago, and your magnet's on the refrigerator. You may get a second bite at that apple, and because you've done a thorough inspection, you don't have to come out and remeasure everything again. You know exactly what you're going to do. Again, is that a lot more work? Yes, it is. But sometimes it's not as much work, as additional work as you might think, particularly when you compare it to how much time you may have been spent just driving to the location. And even if you can't be as thorough as Mr. Holt was, anything you add on to that inspection to give your client a little bit more peace of mind, a little bit more protection, a little bit more information about how they can harden their home against pest invasion, that is ultimately going to go to your bottom line, to your client's peace of mind, and make you more professional and raise the industry standard a little bit higher. And I hope you really consider thinking about that, saying, can you add one more thing onto your inspection when you talk to that you don't become so narrow focused on what the original complaint is, and help your client see a bigger picture of what's happening with their structure. And maybe you may save them from a problem that they didn't even realize that they had, or potentially could have, and save them a lot of money down the road that they didn't even realize was a threat to them. And maybe you can nip something in the bud a little earlier so that we're putting less pesticides into the environment, and you're able to create an extra sale and add value to your client. It's not just about making more money. It's about adding value to your client for a mutually beneficial relationship where you're earning more money, but your client is winning something too. And I think that is where the benefit of this type of education for your client, where you can raise standards and help everyone involved, including those that you're working for, even if you're working for yourself. I hope that's something for you to think about. I hope it's something where you can sort of add that value onto your reports and start developing that database, because you may find that it may be a way to just marginally improve your bottom line and really start improving your lifestyle as well. And I hope you find that helpful. Think bigger, think broader, help your clients see things that they didn't know were there for your benefit and for theirs. I'm Stephen Vantassel, Wildlife Control Consultant. Hey, thanks for listening to Pest Geek Podcast. If you have questions, suggestions for future podcasts, do drop me a line. Lonely out here in podcast land sometimes, so my email address is wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you. See me over on Facebook. Thanks for listening. Back to you, Frank.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.